In 2024, Brazil recorded the lowest rate of clear-cut deforestation in the Amazon in over a decade, down 54% from just 2 years earlier. The satellite monitoring worked. The enforcement worked. 20 years of moratoriums, protected areas, and international pressure had done what they were designed to do, and it was burning. In that same year, forest degradation alerts across the basin surged to 25,000 square kilometers, a 163% increase from 2022. Over 1.9 million hectares of standing forest were destroyed not by loggers or bulldozers, but by fire. Two-thirds of the Amazon's structural loss in 2024 came from burning, not cutting. The defensive tools built to stop chainsaws, the moratoriums, the satellite fences, the enforcement operations are useless against a forest, drying out and igniting from the inside. For 20 years, the global strategy for the Amazon was a single word: stop. Stop the cutting, stop the clearing, stop the expansion. That strategy succeeded against the old enemy. But stopping is not rebuilding. No conservation policy planted a single seed. No enforcement protocol restored a single hectare of what had already been lost. The race to stop cutting is decades old. The race to actively engineer functional forest back onto millions of hectares of dead pasture, while the biome burns around the construction site and the political agreements holding the frontier collapse in real time. That race started in the last 2 years. It depends on a planting method that deploys through the same tractors used for soy and was designed by a network of 700 seed collectors, most of them indigenous, walking through the forest with woven baskets. The standard framing is that the Amazon absorbs carbon and produces oxygen. That's accurate, but it is the least important thing the system does. The Amazon's primary function is as a continental water pump. Trade winds push moisture off the Atlantic westward across the basin. When that moisture falls as rain, billions of trees pull it back out of the soil through their roots, transport it upward, and release it as vapor through microscopic openings in their leaves. The forest sweats roughly 20 billion tons of water into the atmosphere every day. That vapor rises, cools, seeds new clouds, and falls again as rain further inland. The cycle repeats 5 or 6 times as moisture cascades from east to west. Meteorologists call these invisible corridors of airborne water flying rivers. They carry more volume per day than the Amazon River itself discharges into the ocean. When they reach the Andes, they bank south, delivering rainfall to the agricultural heartlands of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. Between a quarter and half of all precipitation in the western Amazon doesn't arrive from the ocean. It comes from moisture the forest pumped into the sky. Here's why fire changes everything. A healthy canopy traps humidity, blocks wind, and maintains a cool, wet pocket underneath it that prevents fire from spreading. Decades of fragmentation, roads, pastures, cleared edges perforated that canopy. When the Amazon hit its worst drought on record in 2023 and 2024, with temperatures spiking 2 to 4 degrees above average across the central and southeastern basin, the forest floor dried out completely. Routine agricultural burns, fires ranchers light every season to clear adjacent pasture, escaped into the standing forest. Those fires move slowly through the understory, but they kill trees. Dead trees dry out and become fuel for the following season. Gaps in the canopy widen. Sunlight bakes the soil harder. Each fire makes the next one worse. Each dry season starts from a lower baseline of resilience. The system locks into a loop that actively maintains its own collapse. And what it's dismantling is the water pump that generates rainfall for a continent. The scientific debate over a basin-wide tipping point, one threshold beyond which the entire Amazon flips irreversibly to savanna, requires honest framing. The most comprehensive synthesis to date from Brando and colleagues in 2025 finds limited evidence for that kind of system-wide cliff. The Amazon is not approaching a single edge. It is absorbing repeated blows, fire, drought, fragmentation, each chipping away at regional resilience in different places at different speeds. Specific zones, especially the southeastern Amazon, are already shifting. Modeling published in Nature in 2024 estimates that by 2050, between 10 and 47% of the forest will face stresses severe enough to push local ecosystems past their individual thresholds. The window for intervention is open, it is not wide, and it is narrowing. And for a while, the strongest single barrier holding the frontier was a voluntary trade agreement. The Amazon soy moratorium, launched in 2006, bound the world's largest grain traders, Cargill, Bunge, ADM, to refuse any soy grown on land cleared within the biome. It cut deforestation in monitored areas by 69%, even as soy plantings expanded by 344%, routed entirely over existing degraded pasture. In January 2026, the industry group representing those same traders formally withdrew. The state of Mato Grosso had passed legislation penalizing companies for holding environmental standards stricter than the national baseline, and the industry walked away. The Amazon Environmental Research Institute projects the moratorium's collapse could drive deforestation up 30% by 2045. The restoration effort is not running against a stable threat. The old defenses are actively falling at the same time the new push is ramping up. That is why the word in the title is race. Before the current wave of mega projects, two communities proved that degraded Amazonian soil could be engineered back into complex, productive ecosystems, given enough time and manual labor. The Tomiyasu Cooperative in Pará has run a layered agroforestry system for 50 years, interplanting short-cycle crops with medium-term fruit trees and long-rotation timber to build synthetic forests that mimic the biological structure of the surrounding jungle. The RECA project on the Rondonia border has operated for 37 years, supporting over 300 families through a mixed native species model centered on cupuaçu, peach palm, and Brazil nuts. These models proved that the soil could recover. What they couldn't crack was scale. Intensive manual management and sustained harvest cycles don't translate to tens of millions of hectares of abandoned, remote cattle pasture. To stabilize the flying rivers, the planting mechanics themselves had to change. The method that solved the problem came from the headwaters of the Xingu River, and it inverts every assumption of conventional restoration. Traditional reforestation means nurseries, saplings grown in greenhouses transported by truck, planted one by one into compacted pasture. The result is roughly 160 plants per hectare, high mortality from heat shock, and a cost near $5,100 per hectare. The method called Muvuka does the opposite. Instead of nursing a few hundred fragile saplings, it buries 350,000 seeds in the ground in a single pass and lets biological competition handle the engineering. For 1 hectare, the recipe calls for approximately 200,000 native tree seeds from 70 to 120 different species, mixed with 150,000 seeds of fast-growing legumes, pigeon peas, jack beans, plants that germinate in days and shoot upward. Because seeds this diverse vary enormously in size, 50 to 150 kilograms of sand is added. The answer is in the sand. It ensures the mixture flows evenly through the hoppers of standard agricultural tractors, the same machines built to sow soybeans. One pass across a field, and the payload is in the ground. Within weeks, the legumes explode upward, forming a dense canopy that blocks sunlight from reaching the soil surface. Invasive African pasture grasses, starved of light, die before they can suffocate a single native seedling. Simultaneously, the legume roots fix atmospheric nitrogen into depleted soil while the leaves above trap moisture, building a cool, humid pocket in what was previously scorched open ground. The 200,000 native tree seeds germinate inside that pocket. They aren't coddled. They compete for light, water, and root space. The weakest die. The survivors drive taproots deep and develop a structural resilience that no greenhouse-raised sapling can match. Research plots recorded an average of 15,500 native tree seedlings per hectare by the end of the first year, roughly 100 times the density of traditional planting. Total cost, approximately $1,845 per hectare, 64% cheaper than conventional planting, and that reduction is the entire reason a 24 million hectare mandate became mechanically conceivable. But 350,000 seeds per hectare from over 100 native species cannot be manufactured. Every seed comes from a living tree, harvested by hand, which created an immediate infrastructure problem. The Xingu Seed Network, 700 collectors organized across 24 groups in the basin, 68% of them indigenous, is the supply chain that solved it. The operational core is the Yarang Women's Movement, founded in 2009 by 15 older women of the Ikpeng people. The name translates to leafcutter ant. The women traverse the forests on foot, tracking the fruiting cycles of over 200 species through knowledge passed down across generations. Species no commercial nursery has ever stocked. Since 2007, the network has gathered over 390 tons of native seed, powered the restoration of nearly 11,000 hectares, produced approximately 33 million trees, and generated over $1.8 million in direct income for the collectors. It was small, but it held 11,000 hectares in the Xingu headwaters with a decade of peer-reviewed structural data proving the biology works, the cost works, and the mechanics scale. And then the institutional money arrived. Between 2023 and 2025, the Xingu proof triggered a cascade of investment attempting to multiply the blueprint by orders of magnitude. These are bets. The distinction matters. The Xingu sites have 10 years of data. The projects that follow have ambition and capital, but no comparable track record, and the results won't be known for a decade. The bets are being placed now at a scale never previously attempted. In late 2023, the Brazilian Development Bank launched the Arc of Restoration, targeting 24 million hectares of degraded land by 2050, backed by an initial billion reais. It explicitly relies on scaling Muvuka. At COP30 in Belém in November 2025, 66 countries endorsed the Tropical Forest Forever facility, which treats intact and restored forest as a sovereign financial asset and pays nations a per hectare annual dividend for maintaining canopy. The facility secured $6.7 billion in initial pledges toward a target of $125 billion, with 20% of all payouts legally mandated to flow directly to indigenous and local communities. In the private sector, the carbon removal startup Mombach locked in over $150 million in offtake agreements with Microsoft, Google, and Meta for 20,000 hectares in Pará. The engineering that proved itself at 11,000 hectares in the Xingu headwaters is now the template for a continental program. Whether the template survives contact with a problem 2,000 times larger is a question none of these projects can yet answer. The physical evidence from the Xingu sites is what every institutional bet now being placed is banking on. The transformation is real, but it doesn't look like a forest for a long time. In the first weeks after a tractor crosses compacted pasture, the site is bare dirt mixed with sand. The ugly phase lasts about a month before the legumes break the surface. Within 6 months, 80% of the ground is covered by chaotic green growth that resembles a weedy field more than anything else. Beneath that, the native trees are driving roots. By year 2, the fastest pioneer species punch through the decaying legume layer. By year 4, a genuine multi-layered canopy has formed. The invasive grasses are dead, and the system requires virtually zero human maintenance. At year 10, the data stabilizes at numbers that justify the entire investment pipeline. Canopy cover routinely exceeding 98%, up to 155 distinct native tree species recorded per hectare, including dozens that were never planted. Their seeds carried in by birds and mammals returning to habitat that could support them again. The fierce early competition among 200,000 seeds produces a final density of roughly 5,000 deeply rooted trees per hectare. But there is a catch in the timeline. Those results describe 11,000 hectares managed over a decade. The mandate is 24 million hectares before 2050. The friction between those numbers is distributed and severe. The seed supply chain faces a bottleneck no amount of capital can instantly resolve. 700 collectors produce 390 tons of seed across nearly 20 years. Millions of hectares would require volumes that dwarf existing capacity, and the regulatory frameworks governing native seed collection were built for monoculture agriculture, not hyper-diverse mixes of 120 species. Young Muvuka plots in their first 5 years before the canopy fully closes and the humid, fire-resistant conditions form beneath it remain vulnerable to the same escaped agricultural burns destroying primary forest. A single fire event can erase 3 years of growth. The financial architecture, despite billions in pledges, faces structural delays. Analysts project the tropical forest forever facility will need 2 to 3 years to structure its bonds and generate returns. Payouts to forest nations likely won't begin before 2028 or 2029. The biome has to survive the gap without that capital. And the soy moratorium's collapse didn't just remove a trade restriction, it dismantled the tracing infrastructure, the satellite monitoring, the supply chain auditing, the third party verification that made enforcement of zero deforestation commitments possible. New clearing can enter the global soy supply chain with minimal friction precisely at the moment when the restoration teams are planting into the landscape around it. The proven engineering covers 11,000 hectares. The mandate is 24 million, a factor of 2,000 larger. And that gap must be closed while deforestation threatens to rebound by 30%, while fire driven degradation continues to climb. And while the financial instruments designed to fund the work are still years from delivering their first payments, restoring 24 million hectares using traditional nursery seedlings would cost over $122 billion. The Tropical Forest Forever facility's entire ambition consumed by planting costs alone. The Muvuka method brings that figure to approximately $44 billion. That cost reduction is the only reason the arc of restoration exists as a feasible program rather than an aspirational document. The entire blueprint traces back to 390 tons of seed, hand gathered by 700 collectors from over 200 species, carried in woven baskets, dried in the sun, mixed with sand, and run through the same tractors that sow the soybeans encroaching on the forest. 15 women of the Ikpeng people named their movement after an ant, a creature that builds architecture far beyond its individual capacity through collective, precise, relentless work. The restored headwaters of the Xingu are the proof that the architecture holds. Whether it can be built fast enough is the question no one can answer yet. Fire-driven degradation covered 25,000 square kilometers in 2024. The proven restoration to date covers roughly 110 square kilometers. The degradation is outpacing the response by orders of magnitude. The engineering is proven, the financing is assembling, the window, according to the best available science, remains open. And it is closing at a speed the restoration pipeline has not yet matched. The Amazon is not a charity case. It is active infrastructure, a water pump, a rainfall engine, a climate regulator that took millions of years to build and can be dismantled in a generation by fire and drought. The Muvuka method doesn't replicate that system. It kickstarts the first generation of trees that, if the canopy closes and the rains hold, will eventually run the system again on their own. The race is real. The tools exist. The outcome is not guaranteed. Subscribe to follow it.